Today we are going to explore the horrifying last minutes of people mauled by wild animals, from a devoted rescuer overwhelmed by her own pack, to a shelter volunteer who ignored every safety protocol.
It was October 15th, 2016, and the Georgia sun was setting over Rebecca Martinez's 10-acre property, casting long shadows across a maze of makeshift kennels and chain-link runs. The constant barking that echoed across the land had become the soundtrack of her life. 40 rescue dogs, each one carrying the scars of abuse, neglect, or abandonment. At 34, Rebecca had spent 8 years building her unofficial sanctuary, taking in the dogs that other shelters wouldn't touch. The aggressive ones, the biters, the animals marked for immediate euthanization. Her recent divorce had left her financially strained and emotionally isolated, with only her dogs for company on the remote property. Rebecca's neighbors had grown used to the noise, though some whispered concerns about the woman who seemed to care more about dangerous animals than her own safety. She rarely left the property anymore, moving between enclosures with hands scarred from countless bites, badges of honor in her mind. Friends who still visited noticed the changes in Rebecca over the months. She'd grown thinner, more withdrawn, speaking more about her dogs than anything else. Her ex-husband had tried to warn her about the dangers, but Rebecca dismissed his concerns as jealousy over her dedication. The local veterinarian had stopped making house calls after Rex had lunged at him through a fence gap, requiring stitches on his forearm. Even the feed delivery drivers had begun leaving supplies at the gate, rather than approaching the main compound. The main enclosure housed her 3 largest rescues: Rex, a 90-pound pit bull mix with a history of severe abuse, Titan, an 85-pound Rottweiler cross, and Scar, a 75-pound mixed breed whose face told the story of his fighting past. What Rebecca didn't realize was that these 3 had been forming an alliance over the past few weeks, establishing a hierarchy that put them at odds with anyone who came between them and food. The warning signs had been there for anyone trained to recognize them. The 3 dogs had begun sleeping closer together, sharing food bowls, and displaying coordinated territorial behavior when other dogs approached. They'd started following Rebecca's movements more intently during feeding times, their body language shifting from grateful anticipation to something more predatory. But Rebecca, exhausted from managing 40 animals alone and emotionally invested in seeing progress where none existed, missed every signal. As evening approached, Rebecca began her daily feeding routine, the most dangerous part of her day. She filled 5 buckets with kibble, the metallic clanging sending the dogs into a frenzy of anticipation. The ground was still wet from an afternoon thunderstorm as she approached the main enclosure, buckets in hand. The 3 large dogs pressed against the fence, their eyes locked on the food, muscles tense with anticipation. Rebecca had done this routine thousands of times before, but tonight felt different. The air seemed charged with more than just humidity. As Rebecca unlatched the gate and stepped into the enclosure, her worn boots slipped on the muddy ground. She stumbled trying to regain her balance, but the weight of the buckets pulled her down. The metal containers crashed to the earth, spilling kibble across the wet dirt. Rex was the first to move, but as Rebecca struggled to get back on her feet, something in his demeanor shifted. His eyes, which had been focused on the kibble, now locked onto her. At that moment, she wasn't the woman who had saved him, she was in competition for resources. The attack came without warning. Rex's 90 pounds of muscle slammed into Rebecca's chest, driving her back to the ground. His jaws clamped down on her shoulder, tearing through flesh with devastating force. Rebecca's scream pierced the evening air, but there was no one around for miles to hear it. Titan and Scar joined the assault within seconds, their pack instincts overriding years of rehabilitation. Titan's massive jaws found her left arm, shaking violently. Scar circled behind, his teeth sinking into her legs, dragging her further from the gate. Rebecca fought desperately, her free hand clawing at Rex's face, trying to break his grip. But the dogs were in full predatory mode now. Their attacks coordinated and relentless. Blood soaked into the muddy ground as they continued their assault, their growls mixing with Rebecca's weakening cries. The feeding frenzy lasted nearly 10 minutes before the dogs finally backed away. Rebecca lay motionless in the mud, her body broken and torn, surrounded by the scattered kibble that had triggered the attack. For 3 days, Rebecca's body remained undiscovered on the isolated property. It wasn't until a delivery driver arrived with dog food that the scene was uncovered. Animal control officers found the 3 attacking dogs still in the enclosure, showing no signs of continued aggression. Rex, Titan, and Scar were euthanized within hours, along with 12 other dogs deemed too dangerous for relocation. Rebecca's death sparked debates about unlicensed rescue operations. New regulations were implemented requiring permits for anyone housing more than 10 rescue animals. But for those who knew Rebecca, the rules came too late. It was March 22, 2015, and the Alabama sun beat down mercilessly on Harold Thompson's property, where barking echoed from kennels scattered across 5 acres of red dirt. At 71, Hank moved slowly between the enclosures, carrying water with the confidence that came from 20 years of dog breeding. He and his wife Martha had built their operation from nothing, specializing in Rottweilers and German Shepherds. What had started as a hobby had grown into a modest business, with 8 breeding females and 3 males, producing litters they sold across the Southeast. But age had made Hank careless about safety protocols. In his younger days, he never would have entered a kennel alone, especially with breeding males during territorial phases. He'd seen what these dogs could do, the power in their jaws, the speed of their attacks, but experience had bred overconfidence. The centerpiece of their operation was Brutus, a 130-pound Rottweiler whose massive frame made him their most sought-after stud. At 4 years old, he was in his prime, with a bloodline tracing back to German working dog. His offspring commanded premium prices from buyers seeking protection animals. Recently, Brutus had been showing increased aggression. A minor injury to his left rear leg had left him limping and irritable, causing him to snap at Martha when she tried to examine the wound. The veterinarian had prescribed pain medication, but the dog's temperament had grown increasingly unpredictable. Martha had expressed concerns about Hank working alone with Brutus, especially given the dog's recent mood changes. But Hank dismissed her worries with stubborn confidence. He'd raised Brutus from a puppy and believed their bond was unbreakable. On that March afternoon, Martha had driven into town for supplies, leaving Hank alone with the dogs. The kennels needed cleaning, water bowls required filling, work Hank had done thousands of times before. Brutus watched from his kennel as Hank approached, the dog's dark eyes tracking every movement with intensity that should have served as warning. The animal was panting heavily despite the shade, his injured leg causing him to shift uncomfortably. Pain had a way of making even docile animals unpredictable, and Brutus was far from docile. Hank unlocked the kennel gate and stepped inside, bucket in hand, his attention focused on the dirty water bowl in the corner. He'd performed this routine hundreds of times, but today Brutus was different. The dog's ears were pinned back, his tail held low, his massive body coiled with tension. As Hank bent down to clean the water bowl, his back turned to the dog, Brutus made his decision. There was no growling, no warning. Just 130 pounds of muscle launching through the air with devastating force. The impact drove Hank face first into the concrete floor, his bucket clattering away as Brutus's jaws found their target. The dog's teeth sank deep into Hank's throat, crushing his windpipe and severing major blood vessels in a single catastrophic bite. Hank's hands clawed desperately at the animal's massive head, but Brutus had locked on with predatory determination. The dog's powerful neck muscles allowed him to shake violently, tearing through tissue and bone with mechanical efficiency. Hank's screams were cut short by the damage to his throat, replaced by a wet, gurgling sound that grew weaker by the second. Blood pooled beneath his body as Brutus continued his attack, driven by instincts bred into his lineage for generations. The assault lasted less than 3 minutes, but the damage was irreversible. When Brutus finally released his grip, Hank lay motionless on the kennel floor, his life ebbing away in the Alabama heat. Martha returned home 2 hours later to find the property strangely quiet. She called out for Hank as she walked toward the kennels, but received no response. When she rounded the corner and saw Brutus standing guard over her husband's body, the full horror became clear. The dog's reaction to Martha's presence was immediate and threatening. He positioned himself between her and Hank's body, his lips pulled back in a snarl. Martha backed away slowly, dialing 911 from her truck. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes, but Brutus refused to allow anyone near Hank's body. After consulting with animal control, the decision was made to shoot Brutus rather than risk additional casualties. The massive Rottweiler died with 3 bullets in his chest. The investigation concluded that Hank's death was a tragic accident caused by his failure to recognize warning signs of an aggressive, injured animal. The breeding operation was shut down, the remaining dogs relocated, and Martha was left to grieve both her husband and the animal that had been part of their family. It was July 8, 2017, and Detroit's summer heat shimmered off abandoned lots as Maria Santos loaded her car with dog food and water. At 28, she'd spent 5 years walking dogs by day and feeding Detroit's feral population by night. Recently laid off, she'd been spending more time in dangerous neighborhoods, trying to help animals most people considered beyond saving. The economic collapse had hit Detroit hard, leaving entire neighborhoods abandoned and creating perfect breeding grounds for packs of wild dogs. These weren't lost pets. They were second and third generation feral animals that had never known human kindness, surviving by scavenging and defending territory with savage efficiency. Maria's regular route took her through 6 abandoned lots, each home to a different pack. She knew their hierarchies, feeding schedules, and individual personalities. But the newest group concerned her the most. 6 dogs led by a large German Shepherd mix she'd nicknamed Alpha, including several animals she didn't recognize. This pack was hungrier, more aggressive, and less predictable than the others. But Maria's compassion overruled her caution. These animals needed help, and she was the only one willing to provide it. As twilight settled over the abandoned neighborhood, Maria parked near the lot where Alpha's pack had made their home. The area was a wasteland of broken concrete and waist-high weeds, perfect cover for animals that had learned to hunt and hide. Maria had been feeding this pack for 3 weeks, always maintaining safe distance. But tonight felt different. The dogs seemed more agitated, their movements more coordinated, their attention more focused on her than the food. What she didn't realize was that pack dynamics had shifted with the addition of 3 new dogs, animals that saw humans not as providers, but as competitors. Alpha emerged from the shadows first, his 80-pound frame moving with predatory grace. Behind him came the others, a scarred pit bull mix, 2 smaller dogs, and 3 newcomers whose breeds were impossible to determine. Their eyes reflected the dim streetlight like mirrors. Maria began distributing food as always, tossing handfuls of kibble in different directions to prevent fighting. But tonight, the strategy backfired. Instead of dispersing to eat, the dogs began to circle her, their movements coordinated and purposeful. When 2 smaller dogs began fighting over food, Maria made the fatal mistake of stepping forward to break up the altercation. The moment she moved toward the fighting dogs, Alpha's pack instincts kicked in. To him, she wasn't the woman who had been feeding them, she was competition for scarce resources. His lips pulled back in a silent snarl as he launched himself at her with devastating force. Maria had no time to react. Alpha's 80 pounds slammed into her chest, driving her backward onto the broken concrete. His jaws clamped down on her left arm, teeth punching through her jacket into flesh beneath. The other dogs joined within seconds. their pack mentality overriding any memory of Maria's kindness. The scarred pit bull grabbed her right leg, his powerful jaws crushing bone as he shook violently. The two smaller dogs went for her torso, tearing through clothing and skin. Maria's screams echoed through the abandoned neighborhood, but there was no one left to hear them. The houses had been empty for years, their windows boarded up. She fought desperately, but 6 dogs working in coordination were more than any human could handle. The pack dragged her deeper into the lot, away from any possibility of rescue. Their coordinated attack spoke to generations of predatory instincts, refined by years of urban survival. These weren't pets gone bad. They were wild animals that had learned to see humans as threats or prey. Maria's movements grew weaker as blood loss and shock took their toll. The dogs showed no signs of stopping, their feeding frenzy triggered by blood and the thrill of a successful hunt. By the time they finally backed away, Maria lay motionless among the weeds and debris. Her body was discovered the next morning by urban explorers. It took 3 days to capture all the 6 dogs using tranquilizer guns and cage traps. The pack was euthanized within hours, their wild nature making rehabilitation impossible. Maria's death sent shockwaves through Detroit's animal advocate community. New safety protocols were established, but for Maria's family, the changes came too late. It was December 3rd, 2014, and fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across rows of kennels at the county animal shelter. Jennifer Walsh, 25 and halfway through veterinary school, moved between cages with a determined stride, believing every animal deserved a second chance. As a weekend volunteer, Jennifer had developed a reputation for advocating for the shelter's most difficult cases. While others focused on friendly, adoptable dogs, she gravitated toward the aggressive ones, animals marked with red cards indicating immediate euthanization. The dog that would cost Jennifer her life was Diesel, a 75-pound pit bull with a scarred muzzle and eyes that seemed to hold years of rage. He'd been surrendered after multiple bite incidents, including an attack on a neighbor's child requiring emergency surgery. The behavioral assessment was decisive. Too dangerous for adoption. Scheduled for euthanization Monday. Jennifer had been watching Diesel for 3 days, looking for signs of the gentle soul she believed existed beneath his aggressive exterior. She'd seen him pace restlessly, heard him growl at anyone who approached, watched him destroy every toy placed in his cage. But she'd also noticed what she interpreted as vulnerability, moments when he pressed against the back wall, briefly softening when he thought no one was watching. The shelter's protocol was clear. Dogs like Diesel were never to be handled alone. Staff with years of experience and proper equipment were required for any interaction with red card animals. But Jennifer had convinced herself that Diesel's aggression was fear-based, that what he needed was one-on-one attention. On that December afternoon, with most staff busy and senior volunteers handling other duties, Jennifer made the decision that would cost her her life. She approached Diesel's kennel with a slip lead and the key to the isolation room, a small windowless space used for behavioral evaluations. Diesel's reaction was immediate and threatening. His lips pulled back, revealing yellowed teeth. Hackles rose along his neck, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Every aspect of his body language screamed danger, but Jennifer interpreted these signs as fear rather than aggression. The moment the kennel door opened, Diesel's demeanor shifted from threatening to calculating. He seemed to assess Jennifer's position in the open doorway behind her. This brief hesitation gave Jennifer false confidence to slip the lead around his neck and guide him toward the isolation room. Once inside, Jennifer closed the door and removed Diesel's lead, believing freedom of movement would help him relax. The room was small, 8 by 10 feet, with concrete walls and no furniture except a metal folding chair. It was designed for safety, but also meant there was nowhere to run. For several minutes, Diesel stood rigid in the center, his eyes never leaving Jennifer's face. She sat in the chair and began talking to him, her voice gentle and encouraging, completely unaware she was being evaluated by a predator. The attack came when Jennifer stood and took a step toward Diesel, her hand extended in what she intended as a peaceful gesture. To Diesel, the movement represented a threat requiring immediate action. His 75 pounds launched across the room with explosive force, his jaws targeting Jennifer's throat with precision. Jennifer's scream was cut short as Diesel's teeth sank deep into her neck, crushing her windpipe and severing major blood vessels in a single bite. His jaws locked onto their target with mechanical efficiency. Jennifer's hands clawed desperately at the dog's head, but Diesel had been bred for combat, his grip unbreakable once engaged. The dog's powerful neck muscles allowed him to shake violently, tearing through tissue and bone while maintaining his hold. Blood sprayed across the concrete walls as Jennifer's struggles grew weaker, her body going into shock from the massive trauma. The attack was swift, brutal, and utterly without mercy. Other volunteers heard Jennifer's initial scream and rushed toward the isolation room, but the heavy door was locked from the inside. By the time they could locate a key and safely enter, Jennifer lay motionless on the concrete floor, her life ebbing away in the pool of blood. Diesel stood over her body, his muzzle stained red, his eyes still burning with the same aggressive intensity that had marked him for euthanization. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Jennifer's injuries were beyond medical intervention. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her dream of becoming a veterinarian ended by the very type of animal she hoped to save. Diesel was immediately sedated and euthanized, his death as swift and clinical as the attack that had preceded it. The investigation that followed was thorough but predictable. Jennifer had violated multiple safety protocols, ignored clear warning signs, and placed herself in a situation that experienced professionals would have avoided. The shelter implemented new security measures, including electronic locks on isolation rooms and mandatory buddy systems for all volunteer activities. Jennifer's death became a cautionary tale in veterinary schools across the country, a reminder that good intentions and academic knowledge are no substitute for experience and proper safety protocols. Her family established a scholarship in her name, but requested that it go to students studying wildlife conservation rather than domestic animal care, a final acknowledgement that some animals, no matter how much love they're shown, remain fundamentally dangerous. It was August 19, 2013, and Missouri heat hung thick over Tommy Rodriguez's remote property, where the stench of neglect permeated every corner of his illegal breeding operation. At 45, Tommy had been running puppy mills for over a decade, but financial pressures had forced him to cut corners in ways that would ultimately cost him his life. The 20-acre property was a maze of makeshift kennels and converted sheds, housing nearly 80 dogs in various stages of breeding and neglect. Tommy specialized in popular breeds that commanded high prices from unsuspecting buyers who never saw the conditions their pets came from. But the real money came from the security side of his operation. 4 massive dogs patrolled the perimeter, 2 cane corsos weighing over 120 pounds each, and 2 mastiff mixes tipping the scales at nearly 140 pounds. These weren't pets or breeding stock. They were weapons, acquired from a defunct fighting operation and trained to be aggressive. The financial pressures that would lead to Tommy's death have been building for months. Veterinary bills, feed costs, and facility maintenance had eaten into profits, while increased scrutiny from animal welfare organizations had forced him to operate more carefully. He'd been cutting back on everything: food, medical care, even basic maintenance. The guard dogs, once fed premium meat to maintain their strength, had been reduced to scraps and cheap kibble. What Tommy didn't understand was that hungry guard dogs were exponentially more dangerous than well-fed ones. Hunger sharpened their predatory instincts, made them more territorial, and reduced their tolerance for human presence. The four animals that had once been content to patrol were now viewing everything on the property, including Tommy himself, as potential competition for scarce resources. The dogs had been showing signs of increased aggression for weeks. They'd begun fighting among themselves over food, marking territory more aggressively and showing less deference to Tommy's commands. A smart operator would have recognized these warning signs, but Tommy was desperate, distracted, and dangerously overconfident. On that sweltering August night, Tommy made his final rounds of the property, checking on breeding females and security systems. It was past midnight and the Missouri countryside was silent except for distant barking and the hum of inadequate ventilation fans. He carried a flashlight and a metal rod for moving aggressive animals, but his attention was focused on financial calculations rather than the danger lurking in the shadows. The guard dogs had been without food for 3 days, not by design, but because Tommy had been too busy dealing with a sick litter to maintain their feeding schedule. Their hunger had reached a critical point where survival instincts overrode years of conditioning. They were no longer guard dogs protecting property. They were predators looking for their next meal. Tommy's mistake was approaching the area where he kept the guard dogs without proper precautions. Normally, he would have fed them first, ensuring their compliance before entering their territory. But financial stress and exhaustion had made him careless, and he walked directly into their domain, carrying nothing but a flashlight and false confidence. The attack began when Brutus, the larger cane corso, emerged from the shadows near the feeding area. His 125-pound frame moved with surprising silence, his massive head lowered in a hunting posture that Tommy should have recognized as a threat. Behind him came the others: Titan, the second cane corso, Rex, a 140-pound mastiff mix, and Scar, whose scarred muzzle told the story of his fighting background. Tommy realized the danger too late. As he turned to retreat, Brutus launched himself forward, his powerful jaws clamping down on Tommy's left thigh with crushing force. The impact drove Tommy to the ground, his flashlight spinning away into darkness as he screamed for help that would never come. The other three dogs joined the attack within seconds, their pack instincts fully engaged. Rex grabbed Tommy's right arm, his massive jaws crushing bone as he shook violently. Titan went for the torso, his teeth tearing through clothing and flesh with mechanical efficiency. Scar circled the attack, darting in to bite and retreat, his fighting experience evident in his tactical approach. Tommy's screams echoed across the empty countryside, but his nearest neighbor was over 2 miles away. The dogs worked with the coordination of experienced predators. Their attacks focused on disabling their prey rather than killing quickly. They had learned patience in their previous lives, and hunger had made them methodical in their violence. The assault continued for nearly 20 minutes, with the dogs taking turns feeding on Tommy while he was still alive. His struggles grew weaker as blood loss and shock took their toll, but the animals showed no mercy. They had been conditioned to view violence as normal, hunger as constant, and humans as either threats or food sources. By the time the dogs finally backed away, Tommy was beyond help. His body lay broken and partially consumed in the dirt near the feeding area, surrounded by the animals he had used to protect his illegal operation. The guard dogs retreated to different corners of the property, their hunger temporarily satisfied, but their aggressive nature unchanged. Tommy's body remained undiscovered for 3 weeks, during which time the dogs continued to feed on his remains while the rest of his breeding operation slowly collapsed. The other dogs, trapped in their kennels without food or water, began dying of starvation. The stench of death eventually attracted authorities investigating reports of animal cruelty. When sheriff's deputies finally arrived, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. Tommy's remains were scattered across the feeding area, while dozens of dead and dying dogs filled the makeshift kennels. The 4 guard dogs were shot on sight after showing aggressive behavior toward the responding officers. The investigation revealed the full extent of Tommy's illegal operation. Dozens of breeding females kept in deplorable conditions, puppies dying from disease and neglect, and financial records showing he'd been selling sick animals to unsuspecting buyers across multiple states. The surviving dogs were euthanized due to their poor health and aggressive conditioning. Tommy's death marked the end of one of Missouri's largest illegal puppy mills, but it came at a cost that extended far beyond his own life. The animals he'd exploited for profit had ultimately become his executioners, their hunger and desperation turning them into the very monsters he tried to create. It was August 15, 2016, and the vast expanse of Lake Okeechobee stretched endlessly across the Florida landscape under a brilliant full moon. The massive freshwater lake, covering over 730 square miles, was dotted with fishing boats and lined with cypress trees whose Spanish moss swayed gently in the humid night breeze. The water's surface reflected the moonlight like scattered diamonds, while the sounds of night herons and bullfrogs created a symphony of wilderness activity. Robert Hayes, a 42-year-old construction worker from Fort Lauderdale, had driven 3 hours to reach his favorite fishing spot along the lake's remote northern shore. Robert had been making these weekend pilgrimages for over 15 years, seeking solitude and trophy bass to escape the stress of his demanding job managing construction crews in the bustling city. His weathered pickup truck was loaded with professional fishing equipment, worth thousands of dollars, testament to his serious dedication to the sport. Robert had grown up fishing the canals and lakes of South Florida with his father and grandfather, learning to read water conditions and fish behavior before he could properly tie his shoes. His success as an angler had made him somewhat legendary among his co-workers, who regularly requested fishing advice and begged for invitations to join his weekend expeditions. That evening, Robert had set up his elaborate fishing station on a small peninsula that jutted into the lake, providing access to deep water where large bass congregated during the cooler nighttime hours. His portable chairs, tackle boxes, and rod holders were arranged with military precision, while multiple lines extended into the dark water at carefully calculated angles. American alligators are apex predators that have dominated Florida's freshwater environments for millions of years, with adult males reaching lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds. These ancient reptiles are most active during dawn and dusk hours, when they hunt for fish, birds, and small mammals alongside shorelines and in shallow water. Alligators are ambush predators that can remain motionless for hours before exploding into action with devastating speed. During nighttime hours, alligators become particularly bold and territorial, often approaching areas with human activity. Robert had been fishing for nearly 4 hours when disaster struck around midnight. He had been fighting a large bass when his excitement caused him to knock over his primary tackle box, sending it tumbling into the knee-deep water near the shoreline. Without hesitation, Robert waded into the dark water to retrieve his tackle box, relying on moonlight to navigate the murky shallows. The massive alligator had been hunting in the shallows for over an hour, drawn to the area by the scent of bait and the vibrations from Robert's fishing activities. The 12-foot male had been lying motionless among the cypress roots, perfectly camouflaged in the dark water while waiting for an opportunity to strike. The attack came without warning or sound. The alligator exploded from its hiding place with devastating speed, its massive jaws clamping down on Robert's right leg just below the knee. The crushing bite force instantly shattered bones and severed major arteries, while the alligator's razor-sharp teeth punctured deep into muscle and tissue. Robert's scream of shock and pain echoed across the empty lake as the massive reptile began its signature death roll. The alligator's powerful body twisted rapidly in the water, using its tremendous strength and weight to disorient its prey while causing maximum tissue damage. Robert was pulled completely underwater as the 800-pound predator spun with mechanical precision. After several intense rotations, the alligator dragged Robert into deeper water to complete the drowning process. Robert's struggles grew weaker as the combination of massive blood loss, crushing injuries, and oxygen deprivation overwhelmed his system. Within minutes, Robert's movement ceased as the massive alligator's brutal assault proved fatal. Other anglers discovered Robert's abandoned truck the following morning when he failed to return home as scheduled. Search and rescue teams found his body 2 days later in deeper water, and wildlife officials successfully tracked and removed the massive alligator due to its proximity to popular fishing areas. Robert's death prompted enhanced warning systems at public fishing areas and renewed educational campaigns about nighttime fishing safety. Robert's family established a foundation promoting angler safety education, but his tragic encounter was just one of many deadly meetings between humans and America's apex reptiles. It was March 22, 2015, and the ancient cypress swamps of Louisiana's Atchafalaya Basin stretched endlessly across the landscape under overcast spring skies. The massive wetland ecosystem, covering over 1 million acres, was alive with the sounds of birds, frogs, and insects, while Spanish moss draped from towering trees, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere. Tourist boats navigated the narrow waterways between massive cypress trunks, their guides pointing out wildlife and sharing stories of Cajun culture. Jennifer Walsh, a 29-year-old elementary school teacher from Chicago, was experiencing her first Louisiana swamp tour with her boyfriend Mark as part of their southern road trip vacation. Jennifer maintained a modest travel blog with 2,100 Instagram followers who enjoyed her authentic approach to documenting new experiences and cultural discoveries. Her Midwestern background had given her no exposure to alligator habitat, and she approached the swamp tour with the same casual attitude she brought to visiting museums or historical sites. Jennifer had been planning this Louisiana adventure for months, researching Cajun culture, local cuisine, and tourist attractions throughout the region. Her blog focused on authentic travel experiences rather than typical tourist destinations, and she was excited to share the unique ecosystem of the Atchafalaya Basin with her followers. Jennifer had purchased professional camera equipment specifically for this trip, and was determined to capture images that would set her content apart from typical tourist photography. That afternoon, Jennifer and Mark had joined a small group tour led by Captain Boudreau, a third-generation Cajun guide who had been navigating these waters for over 20 years. The experienced guide had repeatedly emphasized safety protocols during his pre-tour briefing, warning passengers to remain seated and keep hands inside the boat at all times. Jennifer had listened politely, but treated the warnings as standard liability precautions rather than serious safety concerns. The tour had been progressing smoothly for nearly an hour when Captain Boudreau spotted a large alligator floating approximately 20 feet from their boat. The massive reptile appeared completely motionless, its eyes and nostrils barely visible above the dark water's surface. Jennifer immediately began photographing the magnificent predator, excited to capture close-up images of her first wild alligator encounter. Jennifer became increasingly frustrated with the distance between the boat and the alligator, believing she needed closer shots to create compelling content for her blog. Despite Captain Boudreau's repeated warnings to stay seated, Jennifer began leaning farther over the boat's side to get better angles for her photographs. Her excitement and focus on photography made her oblivious to the guide's growing concern about her behavior. The fatal moment came when Jennifer's phone slipped from her hands and fell toward the dark water. Without thinking, she lunged forward and extended her arm over the boat's edge in a desperate attempt to catch her expensive device before it disappeared into the swamp. Her sudden movement and extended arm created the perfect opportunity for the alligator's lightning-fast attack. The massive alligator exploded from the water with devastating speed, its powerful jaws clamping down on Jennifer's extended arm just above the wrist. The crushing bite force instantly shattered bones and severed major arteries, while the alligator's momentum pulled Jennifer partially over the boat's side. Her screams of shock and pain filled the swamp as the 10-foot predator began dragging her toward the water. Mark and Captain Boudreau immediately grabbed Jennifer's legs and torso, desperately trying to pull her back into the boat while the alligator maintained its crushing grip on her arm. The tug-of-war lasted only seconds. The alligator's superior strength and leverage in its aquatic environment made the outcome inevitable. Jennifer's arm was nearly severed at the wrist as the reptile's teeth worked through bone and tissue. The alligator's powerful tail thrashed violently as it pulled Jennifer completely into the murky water, her blood creating a crimson cloud around the attack site. Captain Boudreau grabbed his emergency pole and struck at the alligator, but the massive reptile had already dragged Jennifer beneath the surface and disappeared into the maze of cypress roots and submerged logs. Jennifer's struggle ceased within minutes as the alligator's death roll and drowning tactics proved fatal. The dark swamp water concealed the final moments of the attack, leaving Mark and the other passengers in stunned silence as Captain Boudreau radioed for emergency assistance. Search teams recovered Jennifer's body later that day, and the tour company implemented stricter safety protocols, including physical barriers and enhanced passenger restraint systems. Jennifer's death prompted industry-wide reviews of swamp tour safety procedures and enhanced training for guides working with inexperienced tourists. Her family filed lawsuits against the tour company, arguing that inadequate safety measures had contributed to the tragedy. The incident became a cautionary tale about the dangers of treating wild predators as photo opportunities. Still, Louisiana swamps weren't the only places where people underestimated the speed and power of these ancient predators. It was June 8, 2017, and the manicured fairways of Naples Grand Golf Club stretched across the southwest Florida landscape under brilliant summer sunshine. The championship course featured numerous water hazards designed to challenge golfers while showcasing the region's natural beauty, with pristine ponds and streams winding between palm trees and tropical vegetation. The morning air was thick with humidity, while the sounds of golf carts and distant conversations created a peaceful atmosphere of recreational luxury. Thomas Chen, a 35-year-old real estate agent from Atlanta, was playing his third round of golf during a week-long Florida vacation with clients and colleagues. Thomas had built a successful career selling luxury properties throughout Georgia, and these Florida golf trips have become essential for maintaining relationships with wealthy clients who own vacation homes in the region. His competitive nature and perfectionist tendencies made him an excellent salesman, but also a golfer who hated losing expensive equipment. Thomas had been playing golf seriously for over 10 years, maintaining a single-digit handicap through regular practice and professional instruction. His golf bag contained thousands of dollars worth of premium equipment, including custom-fitted clubs and high-end golf balls that cost over $5 each. Thomas took pride in his equipment, and had developed a habit of retrieving balls from water hazards rather than accepting the penalty strokes and replacement costs. That morning, Thomas was playing alone as part of an early tee time, enjoying the peaceful course conditions before the Florida heat became unbearable. He had been playing exceptionally well through the first 13 holes, shooting several strokes under par and feeling confident about posting his best scores of the vacation. The 14th hole featured a challenging approach shot over a large pond that had claimed countless golf balls over the years. Thomas's approach shot had started perfectly but caught a gust of wind and splashed into the pond, just short of the green. The expensive ball was clearly visible in the shallow water near the pond's edge, appearing easily retrievable to Thomas. He had successfully retrieved balls from similar situations dozens of times at various Florida courses and considered himself knowledgeable about alligator behavior and safety. What Thomas failed to notice were the fresh warning signs that course maintenance had posted that very morning after spotting a large alligator in the pond during their routine inspection. The bright yellow signs were positioned near the tee box and cart path, but Thomas had been focused on his shot selection and missed the crucial safety information. The 10-foot alligator had claimed the pond as its territory and had been resting motionless near the spot where Thomas's ball had landed. Thomas parked his golf cart near the pond's edge and waded confidently into the knee-deep water, his golf shoes providing good traction on the sandy bottom. He had performed this routine countless times. The morning sun created glare on the water's surface, making it difficult to see beneath the murky water. The alligator's attack was swift and devastating. The massive reptile had been lying motionless in the shallow water, perfectly camouflaged among the pond's natural vegetation and debris. Thomas's entry into the water triggered the alligator's territorial instincts, and the predator exploded into action with lightning speed. The alligator's massive jaws clamped down on Thomas's right leg just below the knee, its crushing bite force instantly shattering bones and severing major arteries. Thomas's scream of shock and pain echoed across the golf course as the 600-pound reptile began its signature death roll, spinning rapidly in the shallow water while maintaining its devastating grip. The death roll dragged Thomas completely underwater as the alligator used its tremendous strength to disorient and drown its prey. Thomas's golf clothes were shredded by the reptile's razor-sharp teeth, while the violent spinning motion caused massive internal trauma and blood loss. The clear pond water turned crimson as the attack continued with mechanical brutality. After several intense rotations, the alligator held Thomas submerged while completing the drowning process. Thomas's struggles grew weaker as the combination of crushing injuries, blood loss, and oxygen deprivation overwhelmed his system. Within minutes, his movement ceased as the alligator's brutal assault proved fatal. Course security discovered the scene an hour later during their routine patrol, finding Thomas's golf cart abandoned near the pond and evidence of the violent attack in the bloodied water. The golf course was immediately closed while wildlife officials captured and relocated the massive alligator. Enhanced warning systems and physical barriers were installed around all water hazards following the incident. Thomas's death sent shockwaves through the golf community and prompted industry-wide reviews of safety protocols at courses in alligator habitat. His family filed lawsuits against the golf course, arguing that inadequate warning systems had contributed to the tragedy. The incident became a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers lurking in Florida's seemingly peaceful recreational environments. It was September 12, 2014, and the pristine waters of the Mayaca River wound through southwest Florida's wilderness like a ribbon of liquid glass under the late summer sun. The ancient waterway, flanked by towering cypress trees and dense palmetto undergrowth, provided a corridor through some of Florida's most untouched natural habitat. Spanish moss draped from massive oak trees, creating a canopy that filtered the afternoon light into dancing patterns on the water's surface, while the calls of herons and ibises echoed through the humid air. Amanda Foster, a 31-year-old registered nurse from Tampa, was enjoying her monthly kayaking adventure with her husband Steve, a tradition they had maintained for over 3 years. Amanda worked long shifts at Tampa General Hospital's emergency department, and these weekend river trips provided essential stress relief from her demanding career, saving lives in one of the city's busiest trauma centers. Her Instagram account with 1,800 followers documented their outdoor adventures throughout Florida's state parks and waterways. Amanda had discovered kayaking during her nursing school years as a way to maintain physical fitness and mental health during the intense academic program. Her natural athleticism and competitive spirit had made her an accomplished paddler, capable of navigating challenging water conditions that intimidated less experienced kayakers. She and Steve had explored dozens of Florida rivers and springs, building expertise in reading water conditions and wildlife behavior. That afternoon, the couple had launched their kayaks from the Mayaca River State Park boat ramp, planning to paddle upstream through a section of river known for its pristine wilderness and abundant wildlife. American alligators become extremely territorial and aggressive during breeding season, which occurs from April through June in Florida. Female alligators construct large nests from vegetation and mud along riverbanks, where they lay 20 to 50 eggs that incubate for approximately 65 days. Mother alligators guard their nest with fierce dedication, attacking any perceived threat that approaches within 50 yards of their nesting site. These protective instincts make female alligators exponentially more dangerous than usual. Amanda and Steve have been paddling for nearly 2 hours when they encountered a section of river narrowed by fallen cypress trees and dense vegetation. The natural obstacle course required careful navigation, and Amanda's kayak became wedged against a partially submerged log near the eastern bank. Instead of waiting for Steve to assist her, Amanda decided to step out of her kayak into the shallow water to push it free from the obstruction. What Amanda couldn't see was the large alligator nest hidden in the dense vegetation just 15 feet from where she stepped into the water. The 9-foot female alligator had been guarding her nest for over a month, and her maternal instincts were at their peak as her eggs approached hatching time. Amanda's entry into the water triggered the female alligator's protective response immediately. The massive reptile exploded from her hiding place with devastating speed, her powerful jaws targeting Amanda's right leg as she stood in the knee-deep water. The crushing bite force instantly shattered bones and severed major arteries, while the alligator's momentum drove Amanda backward into deeper water. Steve watched in horror as the 400-pound alligator began her death roll, spinning rapidly while maintaining her crushing grip on Amanda's leg. Amanda's screams filled the wilderness as the violent rotation dislocated her hip and caused massive internal trauma. The clear river water turned crimson around the attack site as the alligator's razor-sharp teeth worked through muscle and bone. After several brutal rotations, the alligator dragged Amanda beneath the surface to complete the drowning process. Steve paddled frantically toward the attack site, but the alligator's superior strength and aquatic advantages made rescue impossible. Within minutes, Amanda's movement ceased, as the protective mother alligator's assault proved fatal. Search and rescue teams recovered Amanda's body several hours later, and wildlife officials marked the nesting area as off-limits for the remainder of breeding season. Amanda's death devastated the kayaking community and prompted enhanced educational programs about alligator nesting behavior and seasonal safety considerations. The state park implemented new warning systems and seasonal closures for sections of river with active nesting sites. Steve established a foundation promoting water safety education, ensuring Amanda's dedication to helping others would continue through enhanced protection for outdoor enthusiasts. It was November 3rd, 2018, and the pristine waters of Biscayne Bay stretched endlessly across the South Florida landscape under brilliant autumn sunshine. The massive estuary, covering over 400 square miles between Miami and the Florida Keys, was alive with marine life and bordered by dense mangrove forests that provided critical habitat for countless species. The crystal clear water revealed seagrass beds and coral formations, while pelicans and frigate birds soared overhead in the warm tropical air. Carlos Rodriguez, a 28-year-old freelance photographer from Miami, had driven to a remote section of the bay seeking images of American crocodiles for a National Geographic submission. Carlos had built a following of 3,400 Instagram followers through his dramatic wildlife photography, specializing in close-up shots of Florida's most dangerous predators. His portfolio included stunning images of alligators, venomous snakes, and sharks that had earned recognition from several wildlife magazines. Carlos had been pursuing wildlife photography professionally for 2 years, building his reputation through fearless approaches to dangerous subjects that other photographers avoided. His Cuban-American heritage had given him a deep appreciation for South Florida's unique ecosystems, and he took pride in documenting species that most people would never see in the wild. Carlos had invested thousands of dollars in professional camera equipment and underwater housing systems. That morning, Carlos had received reports from park rangers about a massive American crocodile that had been spotted basking on mudflats in a remote section of Biscayne Bay. American crocodiles are much rarer than alligators in Florida, making them highly sought-after subjects for wildlife photographers. Carlos had been trying to photograph this particular species for months, and saw this as his opportunity to capture award-winning images. American crocodiles are significantly more aggressive and territorial than their alligator cousins, with adult males reaching lengths of 15 feet and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds. These apex predators inhabit saltwater and brackish environments throughout South Florida, where they establish territories that they defend with extreme violence. Unlike alligators, crocodiles are more likely to attack humans who enter their domain, and they possess superior speed and agility both in water and on land. Their narrow snouts are filled with razor-sharp teeth designed for gripping and tearing, while their powerful tails can deliver devastating blows. Carlos had been photographing from the mangrove shoreline for over an hour when he spotted the massive crocodile basking on a mudflat approximately 100 yards away. The 13-foot male was an exceptional specimen, easily the largest crocodile Carlos had ever encountered in the wild. His excitement at finding such a magnificent subject overrode his usual caution about maintaining safe distances from dangerous wildlife. Determined to capture ground-level shots that would showcase the crocodile's impressive size and prehistoric appearance, Carlos began wading into the shallow saltwater. The muddy bottom provided uncertain footing, but Carlos was focused entirely on his photography and failed to recognize that he was positioning himself between the crocodile and the deeper water that represented its escape route. The massive crocodile had been monitoring Carlos's approach with growing agitation, its territorial instincts triggered by the human's persistent presence in its domain. When Carlos moved into a position that blocked the reptile's access to deep water, The crocodile's defensive behavior shifted to aggressive action. The ancient predator recognized Carlos as a threat that needed to be eliminated immediately. The crocodile's charge was explosive and terrifying. The 1,200-pound reptile launched itself from the mudflat with surprising speed, its powerful legs propelling it across the shallow water directly toward Carlos's position. Carlos attempted to retreat but slipped on the treacherous mud and fell backward into the water, his expensive camera equipment scattering across the bay floor. The massive crocodile's jaws clamped down on Carlos's torso with devastating force, its crushing bite pressure instantly fracturing ribs and puncturing vital organs. Carlos's screams echoed across the empty bay as the crocodile began its death roll, spinning violently while maintaining its grip on his body. The salt water turned crimson as the reptile's razor-sharp teeth worked through muscle and bone. The death roll continued with mechanical precision, each rotation causing additional trauma while the crocodile's powerful tail thrashed violently in the shallow water. Carlos's attempts to fight back were futile against a predator that had perfected its killing technique over millions of years of evolution. The combination of crushing injuries, blood loss, and drowning quickly overwhelmed his system. Within minutes, Carlos's struggle ceased, as the massive crocodile's brutal assault proved fatal. The ancient predator remained motionless in the bloodied water, guarding its territory while park rangers responded to reports of screaming from other visitors who had heard the attack from a distance. Wildlife officials found the scene an hour later, recovering Carlos's body and damaged camera equipment from the shallow bay. The massive crocodile was monitored but left in its natural habitat, as it had been defending its established territory within the protected ecosystem. Additional warning signs were posted at photography access points throughout the area. Carlos's death sent shockwaves through the wildlife photography community and prompted enhanced safety education for photographers working with dangerous species. His family established a scholarship fund for aspiring wildlife photographers, emphasizing the importance of respecting wild animals and maintaining safe distances. The incident became a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing dramatic shots over personal safety. The evening of June 15, 2014 brought oppressive humidity to Gainesville, Florida, with temperatures still hovering near 85 degrees even as the sun began to set. The thick, sweltering air made even routine tasks feel more laborious, and the climate-controlled reptile facilities offered welcome relief from the stifling heat outside. Robert Bob Hendricks was conducting his routine evening feeding at his specialized python facility, taking advantage of the cooler evening hours when his animals were most active. At 43, Bob had built an impeccable reputation over 18 years of breeding large constrictors, supplying his specimens to zoos and research facilities across the Southeast. His colleagues knew him for his meticulous safety protocols and deep understanding of giant snake behavior. He had never had a serious incident in his entire career. At 9:45 p.m., Bob was preparing to feed his most impressive specimen, an 18-foot, 180-pound female Burmese python he had raised from a hatchling over 8 years. These serpents represent the pinnacle of constrictor evolution, capable of growing over 20 feet in length and weighing more than 200 pounds in exceptional cases. Burmese pythons are among the most powerful constrictors in the world, with muscular bodies perfectly designed for overpowering large prey through sheer crushing force. The Burmese python's hunting strategy is a masterpiece of predatory efficiency. These massive snakes are ambush predators that can remain motionless for days, while waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Their heat-sensing abilities allow them to detect warm-blooded prey from remarkable distances, While their incredible strength enables them to overpower animals as large as deer, wild boar, and even alligators in their native Southeast Asia habitat. When a Burmese python strikes, the attack is devastatingly effective. They don't just constrict around their prey, they position their coils with mechanical precision, applying pressure that can exceed 90 pounds per square inch. These apex predators possess incredible strength that allows them to overpower prey much larger than themselves. A large Burmese python can exert enough constricting force to crush bones and compress vital organs, while their stamina allows them to maintain this pressure for extended periods. Their feeding response, once triggered, is relentless and methodical. They will not release their grip until they are certain their prey is completely subdued. This particular female was in peak condition, her body thick and muscular from years of proper care and feeding. She had been fasting for 4 weeks in preparation for breeding season, making her extremely food-motivated and responsive to feeding cues. Well-conditioned Burmese pythons in feeding mode are among the most dangerous animals to work with, as their predatory instincts are heightened and their strike response is lightning fast. Bob had been preparing to feed her a large rabbit using his standard safety protocols, feeding tongs, secure barriers, and maintaining safe distances at all times. However, as he maneuvered the prey item toward the feeding chamber, the rabbit slipped from his tongs and landed just inside the enclosure opening. Instead of using backup tongs or waiting for the snake to settle, Bob made a split-second decision that violated his own safety rules. Believing he could quickly retrieve the rabbit before the python could react, Bob reached into the enclosure with his bare hand. The moment his arm crossed the threshold, the python's predatory instincts were triggered. The massive python struck with explosive speed, her jaws clamping down on Bob's forearm with crushing force. Her backward curved teeth, each nearly an inch long, sank deep into his flesh and locked him in place. Before Bob could react or call for help, 180 pounds of pure muscle began wrapping around his arm and torso with mechanical precision. The snake's primitive brain had identified him as a threat or potential prey, and her constricting response was now fully activated. Each time Bob struggled or tried to pull away, the python's grip tightened automatically, her powerful muscles responding to his movements by increasing pressure. Bob's attempts to call for help were cut short as the python's grip tightened around his chest, making it impossible to draw a full breath. The snake's muscular coils responded to his struggles by constricting further. Each movement he made triggered an even tighter grip. His ribs began to compress under the tremendous force, and his vision started to darken as oxygen deprivation took hold. The constriction was methodical and relentless. Bob's consciousness faded as the python's coils compressed his chest and restricted blood flow to his brain. The snake maintained her grip for over 17 minutes after he stopped moving, her primitive instincts ensuring that her perceived prey was completely neutralized. Only when she was certain there was no threat did she begin to slowly release her coils and retreat to the back of her enclosure. Bob's assistant found him the next morning when she arrived for the daily feeding rounds. The python was coiled peacefully in her favorite hiding spot, showing no signs of agitation or stress. Bob's body bore the unmistakable marks of constriction, compressed ribs, restricted breathing passages, and the deep puncture wounds where the snake's teeth had initially grabbed him. The investigation revealed that Bob had violated multiple safety protocols in his attempt to quickly retrieve the dropped prey item. His death served as a stark reminder that large constrictors, regardless of their normal temperament or years of conditioning, remain powerful predators whose instincts can be triggered by the slightest provocation during feeding situations. March 8, 2016 dawned clear and warm in Phoenix, Arizona. with temperatures climbing toward a pleasant 78 degrees by evening. The desert air was dry and still, creating perfect conditions for the large constrictors that thrived in Marcus Chen's converted garage facility. Marcus Chen was preparing to feed his largest snake at his home-based breeding operation, taking advantage of the mild evening weather that kept his facility at optimal temperatures. The 31-year-old had spent 8 years specializing in large constrictors and was well known in the reptile community for producing exceptional reticulated pythons. Marcus lived alone and often worked with the snakes during evening hours, a practice that would prove fatal. The converted garage facility where Marcus housed his collection was a marvel of reptile husbandry engineering. Custom-built enclosures provided adequate space for his largest specimens, while sophisticated climate control systems maintained the tropical conditions these Southeast Asian natives required. Marcus had invested heavily in security systems, both to protect his valuable animals and to ensure they couldn't escape. Marcus had acquired his prized reticulated python through a specialized reptile dealer who imported Southeast Asian species for serious collectors. The snake had been legally imported as a juvenile and required special permits. At 7:20 p.m., Marcus approached the enclosure housing his most impressive specimen, an 18-foot, 140-pound female reticulated python he had raised from a hatchling over the past 6 years. These serpents are among nature's most efficient predators, capable of growing over 30 feet in length and weighing more than 250 pounds in the wild. Reticulated pythons are ambush hunters that kill through constriction, wrapping their muscular bodies around prey and applying pressure that can exceed 90 pounds per square inch. The reticulated python's hunting strategy is a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. These snakes possess incredibly sensitive heat-detecting organs that can locate warm-blooded prey from considerable distances. Their muscular bodies are perfectly designed for constriction, with hundreds of ribs providing anchor points for the powerful muscles that generate the crushing force. When constricting, these pythons don't crush their victims as commonly believed. Instead, they prevent breathing by tightening their coils each time the prey exhales, eventually causing cardiac arrest through oxygen deprivation. The process is remarkably efficient, with the snake able to detect the victim's heartbeat and breathing patterns through sensitive receptors along its body. Their incredible strength allows them to overpower animals as large as deer, wild boar, and even small crocodiles in their native Southeast Asia habitat. The python's heat-sensing abilities and lightning-fast reflexes make them nearly impossible to escape from once they've initiated an attack. Their strike speed can exceed 12 miles per hour, and their ability to accurately target warm-blooded animals in complete darkness makes them formidable predators. This particular female was in pre-shed condition, making her nearly blind and extremely defensive. Snakes preparing to shed their skin experience a condition called opaque or blue phase, where their eyes become clouded with a milky film and their vision is severely impaired. During this time, snakes become increasingly defensive and unpredictable, as their reduced vision makes them perceive any movement as a potential threat. Marcus made a critical decision that violated basic safety protocols. Instead of waiting for her to complete the shedding process or using proper feeding protocols from outside the enclosure, he entered her cage directly. This decision went against everything he had learned about large constrictor safety and contradicted the advice he regularly gave to other keepers. The moment Marcus stepped into the enclosure, the python struck defensively, grabbing his shoulder and immediately beginning to constrict. Her defensive response was instantaneous and overwhelming. 140 pounds of pure muscle wrapping around Marcus's torso with crushing force. The python's coils positioned themselves with deadly precision. one loop around his chest, another around his neck, effectively cutting off his ability to breathe or call for help. Marcus's phone was in his pocket, but the constricting pressure prevented him from reaching it or making any coordinated movements. The python's grip tightened with each of his attempts to struggle, her powerful muscles responding to his movements by increasing pressure. The snake's primitive brain had identified him as a threat to be neutralized, and her instincts demanded she maintain her grip until the perceived danger was eliminated. His neighbor found him the following evening when Marcus failed to answer repeated calls about a scheduled reptile pickup. The python had to be carefully removed by experienced animal control officers who understood the delicate process of unwrapping a constrictor without causing further harm. The incident became a rallying cry for enhanced safety protocols when working with large constrictors. This tragedy demonstrated the critical importance of never entering large constrictor enclosures and always having safety backup when working alone. Marcus's death served as a sobering reminder that even the most experienced keepers can make fatal errors in judgment, and that large constrictors, regardless of their normal temperament, remain powerful predators capable of killing humans. April 22, 2017 brought perfect spring weather to San Antonio, Texas, with clear skies and mild temperatures in the mid-70s creating ideal conditions for working with reptiles. The pleasant morning air made it comfortable to work in the facility without relying heavily on climate control systems. James Jimmy Rodriguez was photographing snakes at his commercial breeding facility, Lone Star Pythons, taking advantage of the excellent natural lighting that the clear morning provided. At 38, Jimmy ran one of Texas's largest ball python breeding operations and was respected throughout the reptile community for his genetic work with rare morphs. He had a history of minor heart problems, but managed them with medication and maintained an active lifestyle. Jimmy was known for his expertise with ball pythons, a species considered among the safest large snakes to handle due to their docile temperament. His facility housed hundreds of snakes, and he had been successfully breeding pythons for 12 years without serious incident. The commercial success of Lone Star Pythons had allowed Jimmy to expand his operation significantly over the years, growing from a hobby into a full-time business. At 6:30 a.m., Jimmy was photographing a valuable adult male ball python for online sales, part of his regular routine for marketing his animals to collectors worldwide. The 6-foot specimen represented the gentle nature that made ball pythons popular in the pet trade. Native to West and Central Africa, ball pythons are non-venomous constrictors that typically grow 3 to 5 feet in length, though exceptional specimens like this one can reach 6 feet. They're called ball pythons because of their tendency to curl into a tight ball when threatened, with their head protected in the center of their coiled body. Unlike their larger reticulated cousins, ball pythons are known for their calm demeanor and reluctance to bite. They're primarily nocturnal creatures that spend much of their time hiding in burrows or termite mounds in their native African habitat. When ball pythons do constrict, it's typically a gentle pressure compared to larger python species. However, they still possess the fundamental constricting instincts of all pythons. When they feel threatened or sense instability, they will wrap around whatever they perceive as secure and tighten their grip. Jimmy suddenly experienced crushing chest pain and shortness of breath, the unmistakable onset of a massive heart attack. The cardiac event struck without warning, sending waves of agony through his torso as his cardiovascular system began to fail. His breathing became labored and erratic as he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing with the pain and stress of the medical emergency. As Jimmy collapsed, The python was still draped around his neck and torso in the relaxed position typical of calm ball pythons during handling. The snake, sensing Jimmy's sudden distress through his rapid heartbeat, irregular breathing, and the stress hormones flooding his system, immediately shifted from its relaxed state to defensive mode. The python's response was purely instinctual. When ball pythons feel threatened or sense that their environment has become unstable, they seek security by wrapping around whatever seems most stable. Under normal circumstances, Jimmy could have easily removed the docile snake with minimal effort. However, Jimmy's weakened state from the cardiac arrest prevented him from performing even these simple movements. The combination of the heart attack and the snake's natural constricting response created a deadly situation that neither Jimmy nor the python could have anticipated. Jimmy's assistant found him 3 hours later when arriving for the morning shift. The snake was still wrapped around him, not from aggression but from defensive instinct triggered by Jimmy's medical emergency. Despite immediate medical attention, the combination of cardiac distress and restricted breathing had proven fatal. The incident led to new recommendations for buddy systems in reptile facilities and highlighted the importance of having immediate backup when working with any constricting species, regardless of temperament. The tragedy demonstrated that even the most docile snakes could become inadvertently dangerous when their handlers experience medical emergencies. August 11, 2015 brought scorching heat to Tucson, Arizona, with temperatures soaring past 110 degrees by mid-afternoon. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, making the climate-controlled research facility a welcome refuge from the brutal heat outside. Dr. Patricia Pat Williams was conducting routine maintenance at her private research facility, grateful for the air conditioning that kept her workspace at a comfortable temperature while the desert baked outside. At 45, Dr. Williams held a PhD in herpetology and operated a licensed facility that bred native venomous snakes for educational purposes. She had been working with venomous species for 15 years and was considered an expert on southwestern reptiles. She had been bitten twice before during her career, both times by copperheads, with minimal effects beyond standard localized symptoms. These previous incidents had followed typical patterns for copperhead envenomation: localized pain, swelling, and tissue damage that resolved with appropriate medical treatment. Her experience with these bites had given her confidence in her ability to handle copperhead encounters. At 2:15 p.m., while cleaning a copperhead enclosure, Pat was working with one of North America's most common venomous snakes. Copperheads are medium-sized pit vipers, typically growing 2 to 3 feet in length, with distinctive hourglass-shaped crossbands across their copper-colored bodies that provide excellent camouflage in their natural leaf litter habitat. They're found throughout the eastern United States and are responsible for more venomous snake bites than any other North American species, primarily because of their wide distribution and tendency to freeze when threatened rather than flee. The copperhead's defensive strategy is based on camouflage rather than aggression. These snakes have evolved coloration and patterns that make them nearly invisible when lying motionless among fallen leaves and forest debris. When threatened, copperheads typically remain perfectly still, relying on their camouflage to avoid detection. Copperhead venom is considered relatively mild compared to other pit vipers like rattlesnakes or cottonmouths. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, containing enzymes that break down blood cells and tissue, causing localized damage, swelling, and pain. However, fatalities from copperhead bites are extremely rare in healthy adults, with most bites resulting in localized symptoms that resolve with proper medical treatment. The species is also known for dry bites, Defensive strikes where little or no venom is injected, which occur in approximately 25% of copperhead encounters. These snakes are ambush predators that rely on their excellent camouflage to remain hidden while waiting for prey. Their heat-sensing pit organs can detect warm-blooded animals from several feet away, allowing them to strike with remarkable accuracy even in complete darkness. Copperheads are generally docile and prefer to remain motionless when humans approach, relying on their camouflage rather than aggressive behavior. They typically strike only when directly threatened, stepped on, or handled. And even then, many strikes are defensive warnings rather than serious attempts to inject venom. Pat was bitten on the hand when she momentarily lost focus during a phone call with a colleague about an upcoming research project. The copperhead's defensive strike was typical for the species, a quick bite and immediate release, more of a warning than a serious attack. The bite itself seemed almost insignificant at first, 2 small puncture wounds that barely bled, typical of a copperhead's relatively small fangs. However, this bite triggered an unprecedented reaction that Dr. Williams had never experienced before. Within minutes of the bite, she began experiencing symptoms that had nothing to do with the snake's venom. Her throat began to tighten, her breathing became labored, and hives erupted across her skin in a pattern consistent with severe allergic reaction. Years of exposure to snake proteins through handling, feeding, and research activities had sensitized her immune system without her knowledge. The allergic reaction developed with terrifying speed, overwhelming her body's normal responses to the relatively mild copperhead venom. Her airways began to close as histamines flooded her system, while her blood pressure dropped precipitously as her cardiovascular system went into shock. The familiar symptoms of copperhead envenomation were completely overshadowed by the life-threatening allergic response. Dr. Williams recognized the signs of anaphylaxis immediately and managed to administer her EpiPen while calling 911. Her scientific training allowed her to understand what was happening to her body. But the dual crisis of envenomation and allergic reaction created a medical emergency that went far beyond standard treatment protocols. The copperhead's venom, while mild by pit viper standards, began causing tissue damage and localized bleeding at the bite site. Simultaneously, the allergic reaction attacked her respiratory and cardiovascular systems, creating a cascade of complications that her body couldn't manage. Her airways continued to constrict despite the epinephrine, while the venom's anticoagulant properties interfered with her body's ability to clot properly. Dr. Williams died en route to the hospital, becoming the first documented case of fatal anaphylaxis triggered by a copperhead envenomation. Her death shocked the herpetological community and led to new recommendations for allergy testing among long-term reptile handlers. The tragedy revealed that even experienced professionals could develop hidden sensitivities to the animals they'd worked with safely for years. December 3rd, 2013 brought the worst ice storm in decades to the mountains of North Carolina, with freezing rain coating everything in a treacherous layer of ice. By evening, temperatures had plummeted to well below freezing, and the rural areas around Asheville were locked in a crystalline grip that snapped power lines and left thousands without electricity. Snake Steve Morrison was dealing with the severe power outage at his rural breeding facility, watching nervously as the temperature continued to drop, and his backup heating system strained against the bitter cold. At 52, Steve had been breeding native venomous species for 22 years, supplying educational institutions and zoos throughout the Southeast with specimens for research and educational programs. He was considered an expert on southeastern venomous snakes and lived alone on his remote mountain property. Steve had invested heavily in backup systems to protect his animals during emergencies, understanding the critical nature of maintaining proper temperatures for his cold-blooded charges. His facility included backup generators, battery-powered heating systems, and emergency protocols designed to keep his animals alive during power outages and other emergencies. During the ice storm that knocked out power, Steve brought a small generator into his attached garage to power essential heating systems for his snakes. The decision seemed logical. His animals' lives depended on maintaining proper temperatures, and the generator could provide the necessary electricity to keep critical heating systems running. However, Steve underestimated the ventilation requirements for safe generator operation in an enclosed space. The attached garage, sealed against the winter cold, began filling with carbon monoxide as the generator ran continuously. The colorless, odorless gas accumulated steadily as Steve worked frantically to maintain his animals' life support systems, unaware that he was slowly poisoning himself with each breath. Carbon monoxide is particularly insidious because it binds to hemoglobin more readily than oxygen, gradually reducing the body's ability to carry oxygen to vital organs. As CO2 levels rose throughout the evening, Steve became increasingly disoriented and failed to notice that vibrations from the generator had loosened a cage latch, allowing a 4-foot timber rattlesnake to escape onto the garage floor. The constant vibration from the running generator had gradually worked the latch mechanism loose, a failure that Steve would have immediately noticed under normal circumstances. The escaped timber rattlesnake represented one of the most dangerous species in Steve's collection. Also known as the canebrake rattlesnake in some regions, timber rattlesnakes are among the most formidable venomous snakes in North America. These heavy-bodied pit vipers can grow up to 6 feet in length and possess potent venom that combines both hemotoxic and neurotoxic properties, causing tissue destruction, blood clotting disorders, and nervous system damage that can be fatal if left untreated. Timber rattlesnakes are known for their generally docile nature compared to other rattlesnake species, often remaining motionless and relying on their excellent camouflage when threatened. Their coloration provides perfect camouflage among fallen leaves and forest debris. However, timber rattlesnakes will strike defensively when stepped on, cornered, or directly contacted. Their venom yield is substantial. A single bite can inject 100 to 150 milligrams of venom, with as little as 100 milligrams potentially fatal to an adult human. These snakes are ambush predators that can remain motionless for hours or even days while waiting for prey to come within striking range. Their heat-sensing pit organs allow them to detect warm-blooded animals with remarkable precision, even in complete darkness. When they do strike, their speed is explosive. They can extend their bodies nearly their full length in a fraction of a second. In his severely impaired state from carbon monoxide poisoning, Steve didn't see the snake coiled on the floor near his workbench and stepped directly onto it while checking equipment connections. The timber rattlesnake's response was purely defensive, a quick strike to the perceived threat followed by an immediate retreat to a defensive coil. The bite delivered a substantial dose of venom into Steve's ankle, penetrating deep into the tissue and immediately beginning the process of tissue destruction and systemic toxicity. Under normal circumstances, Steve would have immediately recognized the severity of the situation and implemented his well-rehearsed emergency protocols. However, the carbon monoxide poisoning had severely impaired his cognitive function, preventing him from thinking clearly about the protocols he had followed successfully over 2 decades. Steve became confused about the bite's significance and delayed calling for help. The combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and timber rattlesnake envenomation created a deadly synergy that attacked multiple organ systems simultaneously. The CO2 prevented his blood from carrying oxygen effectively, while the snake's venom caused additional respiratory depression and cardiac complications. Steve lost consciousness sometime after midnight, never realizing that his emergency solution had become his death trap. Emergency responders found him the next morning after neighbors reported concerns about generator exhaust visible from his property. The timber rattlesnake was discovered coiled peacefully in a corner of the garage, having returned to its preferred hiding behavior after the defensive strike. The incident led to mandatory carbon monoxide detector requirements for backup power systems in reptile facilities, and served as a sobering reminder that even emergency situations can create cascading failures that turn life-saving equipment into deadly hazards. Steve's death demonstrated how emergency situations can impair judgment and create dangerous conditions that experienced professionals might not anticipate. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.
The morning of June 15, 2014, broke crisp and clear along California's rugged coastline. A gentle offshore breeze groomed the waves to perfection at Año Nuevo State Park, creating the glassy conditions that serious surfers dream about. The early morning light painted the water in shades of gold and turquoise, promising another beautiful day in paradise. Zephyr Castellanos had been awake since 5:30 a.m., his internal clock perfectly tuned to catch the dawn patrol sessions that most surfers missed. At 26, the surf shop employee from Half Moon Bay embodied the California surf culture: sun-bleached hair, perpetual tan, and an infectious enthusiasm for riding waves that bordered on obsession. His co-workers knew him as the guy who would paddle out in almost any conditions, the one who preferred solitude over crowds, and always seemed to find the best waves when others stayed home. Zeph had been surfing these waters for 8 years, long enough to know every reef, every current, and every subtle change in the ocean's mood. His friends described him as fearless, sometimes recklessly so, with a tendency to push boundaries that more cautious surfers respected from a distance. He was the type who would surf during storms, paddle out in the dark, and explore breaks that others deemed too dangerous. What Zeph didn't consider was that Año Nuevo State Park sits adjacent to one of California's largest elephant seal colonies. During pupping season, which runs from April through September, the waters around the rookery become a feeding ground for one of the ocean's most formidable predators. At 6:30 a.m., Zeph paddled out into the lineup, positioning himself about 200 yards from shore. The water was crystal clear, visibility extending down 15 feet to the sandy bottom dotted with kelp forests. The pelicans and cormorants that usually dotted the rocks were nowhere to be seen, but Zeph was too focused on the next set to pay attention to nature's warning signs. For the next hour, Zeph surfed alone in paradise. Wave after perfect wave rolled through, each one better than the last. He was having the session of his dreams, the kind that would become legend among his surf shop buddies. The sun climbed higher, painting the water in brilliant blues and greens. What he didn't know was that beneath the surface, a 15-foot female great white shark had been hunting in the area since before dawn. Great white sharks are the ocean's ultimate apex predator, perfectly evolved killing machines that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. These magnificent hunters can grow up to 20 feet in length and weigh over 5,000 pounds. Their torpedo-shaped bodies can propel them through the water at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour, and their jaws contain up to 300 serrated teeth arranged in multiple rows. During elephant seal pupping season, mature great whites patrol these waters like silent sentinels, drawn by the abundance of prey. The massive predator had been patrolling the seal colony's feeding grounds when Zeph's silhouette caught her attention. From below, a surfer on a board presents almost the identical profile as a seal, the shark's preferred prey. At 7:45 a.m., as Zeph sat on his board waiting for the next set, the attack came with devastating suddenness. The great white struck from directly below with explosive force, launching both Zeph and his board several feet into the air. The impact was so violent that 2 other surfers who had just paddled out witnessed the entire attack unfold in horrifying detail. The shark's massive jaws clamped down on Zeph's torso with crushing force, her serrated teeth designed by evolution to tear through flesh and bone. The initial bite caused massive trauma to his chest and abdomen, severing major blood vessels and causing catastrophic internal injuries. Zeph's screams screams echoed across the water as the predator shook him violently before releasing him and disappearing back into the depths. The two witness surfers immediately paddled toward Zeph, calling 911 while trying to get him onto one of their boards. Blood was pouring from multiple wounds, turning the crystal-clear water crimson. Despite their desperate efforts to keep him conscious and apply pressure to his wounds, Zeph was losing blood at an alarming rate. Coast Guard rescue boats arrived within 18 minutes of the emergency call, but it was already too late. Zeph had sustained fatal injuries from the initial strike and died from blood loss before the rescue boats could reach the scene. The investigation revealed that during pupping season, Año Nuevo typically hosts between 10 and 15 great white sharks at any given time, and Zeph had positioned himself directly in their hunting corridor during their most active feeding period. August 22, 2015, dawned hot and humid in South Florida. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete docks of Port Everglades, where the air shimmered with heat waves rising from the pavement. By 2 p.m., the temperature had climbed to 94 degrees, and the incoming tide was beginning to push warmer water from the Atlantic into the harbor's maze of channels and marina slips. Orion Blackwater wiped the sweat from his forehead as he loaded his diving gear into the back of his pickup truck. At 29, he had built a reputation as one of South Florida's most reliable commercial divers. The guy boat owners called when they needed hull cleaning, prop repairs, or underwater maintenance in conditions that made other divers think twice. His weathered hands and sun-damaged skin told the story of 5 years spent working beneath the surface in some of the most challenging aquatic environments on the East Coast. Orion's friends knew him as a risk-taker who thrived on difficult jobs that others wouldn't touch. He was the diver who would work in zero-visibility water, navigate around massive ship propellers, and clean hulls in harbors where most professionals refused to enter. That afternoon, Orion received a last-minute call from the captain of a sport fishing charter that had just returned from a successful trip. The boat's hull was covered in marine growth affecting performance, and they needed the cleaning done immediately for another charter departing the next morning. The job paid double the usual rate for rush work, money that Orion couldn't afford to turn down. Despite the warning signs, the murky harbor water, the incoming tide, and the fish blood and scraps still floating around the boat from the recent charter, Orion decided to take the job. Port Everglades is a major shipping channel that connects directly to the Atlantic Ocean, creating a highway for marine life moving between deep water and shallow harbor areas. The incoming tide acts like a dinner bell for opportunistic predators. At 2:45 p.m., Orion suited up and checked his equipment one final time. The water in the marina slip was a murky brown-green, visibility limited to maybe 3 feet. Fish scales and blood from the charter's recent trip floated on the surface, creating an oil-slick rainbow that should have been a red flag to any experienced diver. He entered the water with his cleaning equipment and descended to the boat's waterline, beginning the methodical process of scraping marine growth from the fiberglass hull. The work was routine. He had cleaned hundreds of similar boats in similar conditions. What Orion didn't know was that a 9-foot bull shark had followed the incoming tide into the harbor, drawn by the scent of fish blood and bait that led directly to his worksite. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous sharks in the world, not because of their size, though they can reach 11 feet and weigh over 500 pounds, but because of their unique physiology and aggressive temperament. Unlike most sharks, bulls can tolerate both saltwater and freshwater, allowing them to travel into harbors where humans least expect them. The shark had been patrolling the harbor's entrance when the olfactory signals triggered its feeding response. Bull sharks are ambush predators that rely on stealth and explosive power to capture their prey. In murky water, they use their acute sense of smell and electroreception to locate targets, often approaching from below or behind where visibility is most limited. 20 minutes into the job, as Orion worked at a depth of 8 feet scraping barnacles from the boat's keel, the bull shark struck without warning. The attack came from behind and below, the shark's powerful jaws clamping down on Orion's torso with crushing force. The impact drove him against the boat's hull, and his regulator was torn from his mouth as the predator began its characteristic thrashing behavior. Orion fought desperately, punching at the shark's snout and trying to reach his diving knife, but the animal's grip was unbreakable. The thrashing continued for nearly 30 seconds before the shark released its grip and disappeared back into the murky water. Harbor patrol officers found Orion floating face down 15 minutes later, alerted by other boaters who had heard the commotion and seen blood in the water. Despite immediate CPR efforts and emergency medical treatment, he had sustained severe injuries to his torso and legs and died from blood loss. October 12, 2016, brought perfect conditions to Oahu's legendary North Shore. The trade winds had died down to a gentle whisper, leaving the ocean surface like polished glass that reflected the brilliant blue Hawaiian sky. As afternoon melted into evening, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and amber. Dex Thornfield prepared his research equipment on the deck of the university's 28-foot research vessel. At 25, the marine biology graduate student from the University of Hawaii embodied the perfect blend of academic rigor and island lifestyle. His sun-streaked brown hair and easy smile masked an intense dedication to his research that had impressed his professors and earned him a coveted spot in the university's shark behavior program. That evening, Dex was conducting his final data collection dive for a chapter on tiger shark crepuscular behavior, their tendency to become more active during dawn and dusk periods. The dive site off Halewa was perfect for his research, a shallow reef system in 20 feet of water where tiger sharks regularly appeared during evening hours. Tiger sharks are among the ocean's most formidable predators, capable of growing up to 18 feet in length and weighing over 2,000 pounds. Their distinctive striped pattern gives them their name, but it's their incredibly diverse diet and powerful jaws that make them truly remarkable. Tiger sharks are often called the wastebaskets of the sea because they'll eat almost anything: fish, seals, turtles, birds, and even garbage. At 6:20 p.m., as the sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the reef, Dex descended into the crystal-clear water. Visibility was excellent, nearly 80 feet, allowing him to observe the reef's ecosystem in stunning detail. He had been diving alone, a decision that violated standard safety protocols, but was sometimes necessary for behavioral research, where multiple divers might alter shark behavior patterns. For the first 20 minutes, the dive proceeded exactly as planned. Dex observed the typical evening transition as diurnal fish species sought shelter in the reef, while nocturnal hunters began to emerge. At 6:40 p.m., as twilight deepened, Dex noticed a large shadow moving along the reef's edge. His pulse quickened with excitement as he recognized the distinctive silhouette of a mature tiger shark, exactly what he had been hoping to observe. The shark was magnificent, approximately 11 feet in length, with the characteristic broad head and powerful build of a mature female. Her distinctive tiger stripes were clearly visible in the fading light, and she moved with the confident, unhurried pace of an apex predator, surveying her territory. Dex began documenting the shark's movement patterns, noting her methodical search behavior as she investigated crevices and overhangs where prey might be hiding. During twilight hours, this investigative behavior becomes more pronounced as they actively hunt for diverse prey species. The shark's behavior initially followed the patterns Dex had observed in previous encounters: systematic hunting movements, occasional pauses to investigate interesting scents or vibrations, and the characteristic head-swaying motion that helps them pinpoint prey locations. But as the light continued to fade and the shark's hunting instincts became more pronounced, her behavior began to change. She started moving more directly, her swimming pattern becoming less exploratory and more purposeful. What Dex didn't realize was that he had become the focus of her attention, not as a researcher observing a subject, but as a potential prey item that had triggered her predatory response during the peak hunting hours of twilight. The attack came with shocking suddenness. One moment Dex was filming the shark's approach, excited about the close-range behavioral data he was collecting. The next moment, 2,000 pounds of apex predator struck him from the side with devastating force. The tiger shark's massive jaws clamped down on his torso, her serrated teeth designed by evolution to slice through the toughest materials, penetrating his wetsuit and body with surgical precision. The impact drove Dex against the coral reef, his camera and equipment scattered across the sandy bottom. He fought desperately, trying to push against the shark's snout, but the animal's grip was unbreakable. The attack lasted less than a minute, but the damage was catastrophic. When the shark finally released her grip and disappeared back into the darkening water, Dex was left with massive trauma to his chest and abdomen. Blood clouded the water around him as he struggled to reach the surface, his diving training taking over even as his body went into shock. His research partner on the boat heard the commotion and saw the blood in the water, immediately calling for emergency assistance. Coast Guard rescue swimmers reached him within 12 minutes, but the tiger shark's powerful bite had caused massive injuries to his torso, and he died from trauma before rescue swimmers could get him to safety. Dex Thornfield's death was a tragic irony. A dedicated researcher who had spent years studying tiger shark behavior, ultimately becoming a victim of the very predators he sought to understand. The investigation revealed that Dex had been conducting research during peak tiger shark activity hours in an area known for aggressive encounters. Marine biologists noted that his presence during the shark's most active hunting period had created conditions for a predatory response rather than the passive observation he had expected. March 18, 2017 dawned with the kind of perfect conditions that underwater photographers dream about. 45 miles southeast of Key West, the Gulf Stream's crystal-clear blue water stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its surface barely disturbed by the gentlest of swells. The sun blazed overhead in a cloudless sky, sending shafts of brilliant light deep into the water column. Phoenix Waverly adjusted his camera housing as he prepared for what he hoped would be the dive of his career. At 32, the freelance underwater photographer had built an impressive portfolio shooting for diving magazines and National Geographic submissions, but he had never captured the images that would truly establish his reputation in the competitive world of marine photography. His sun-weathered face and calloused hands told the story of 6 years spent chasing the perfect shot in some of the world's most challenging underwater environments. That morning, Phoenix had chartered a boat to take him to coordinates where oceanic white-tip sharks had been reported. These magnificent predators were exactly what he needed for his latest project, a photo essay on open ocean apex predators for a major diving publication. The dive site was perfect. Deep blue water with excellent visibility extending over 150 feet in every direction, with the bottom at over 2,000 feet below. At 1:30 p.m., Phoenix entered the water with his camera equipment and a mesh bag containing frozen mackerel and sardines. The water temperature was a perfect 78 degrees, and the visibility was so clear that he could see the boat's anchor line disappearing into the blue depths below. The first oceanic white-tip appeared within minutes, materializing out of the blue like a ghost. Phoenix's heart raced with excitement as he recognized the distinctive white-tipped fins and stocky build of a mature male, probably 10 feet in length. Unlike coastal shark species that might be cautious around humans, oceanic white-tips are known for their fearless curiosity and tendency to investigate anything that enters their domain. They're often called the sea dogs because of their persistent, almost aggressive approach to potential food sources. The shark approached with the characteristic bold confidence of its species, circling Phoenix at a distance of about 20 feet while sizing up this new addition to its territory. Phoenix began photographing immediately, capturing the shark's graceful movements as it patrolled the water column. To attract the shark closer for more intimate portraits, Phoenix opened his bait bag and released a small amount of fish blood and oil into the water. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The oceanic white-tip's behavior changed instantly, its movements becoming more direct and purposeful as its feeding instincts were triggered by the scent of prey. Within minutes, 2 more oceanic white-tips appeared, drawn by the chemical signals dispersing through the water. Phoenix found himself surrounded by 3 magnificent predators, each one larger and more impressive than the last. For nearly an hour, Phoenix captured incredible images as the sharks investigated the bait and circled his position. But as the bait continued to disperse through the water and more sharks arrived, the situation began to change. The oceanic white-tips were becoming increasingly excited, their movements more erratic and aggressive as their feeding response intensified. Phoenix, focused on capturing the perfect shot, didn't immediately recognize the warning signs. When he finally decided it was time to surface, he discovered that the situation had become far more complex than he had anticipated. As Phoenix began his ascent toward the surface, the largest female oceanic white-tip intercepted his path, her behavior now clearly aggressive rather than merely curious. The shark had been stimulated into feeding mode by the bait, and Phoenix's movements triggered her predatory response. The attack came as Phoenix reached a depth of 30 feet, still 200 yards from the dive boat. The female oceanic white-tip struck from below with devastating force, her powerful jaws clamping down on his torso. The impact drove him deeper into the water, his regulator torn from his mouth as the shark began the characteristic thrashing behavior that oceanic white-tips use to disorient and weaken their prey. Phoenix fought desperately, striking at the shark's snout and trying to reach his diving knife, but the animal's grip was unbreakable. The attack continued for nearly a minute before the shark released its grip, only to be replaced by one of the other white-tips that had been circling nearby. The feeding frenzy that followed was swift and brutal. Multiple sharks attacked in succession, each one drawn by the blood in the water and the competitive feeding behavior of the others. Phoenix's camera equipment sank into the depths as he struggled to reach the surface, but the repeated attacks had caused massive trauma to his torso and limbs. The dive boat crew, alerted by the commotion and the blood visible on the surface, reached Phoenix within 15 minutes. Despite immediate first aid and emergency medical treatment, he had sustained fatal injuries from multiple bites to his torso and limbs and died from blood loss and trauma during the helicopter evacuation. The investigation revealed that Phoenix had violated several safety protocols for open ocean shark photography, including diving alone, using bait to attract predators, and working without proper safety equipment. Marine biologists noted that oceanic white-tips are particularly dangerous when artificially stimulated by bait. July 15th, 2013 brought perfect diving conditions to the waters off Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The summer sun blazed overhead in a cloudless sky, and the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon in shades of deep blue and green. A gentle southwest breeze created just enough surface chop to keep the water oxygenated, while underwater visibility extended to an impressive 40 feet. Captain Reef, Sharky Maddox, wiped the salt spray from his weathered face as he positioned his salvage vessel over the GPS coordinates he had marked 3 days earlier. At 35, Reef embodied everything that made New England commercial divers legendary: tough, resourceful, and willing to tackle jobs that others considered too dangerous or unprofitable. His nickname, Sharky, had been earned not from any encounters with predators, but from his aggressive business tactics and his ability to smell opportunity in the water, like a shark detecting blood. Reef had built his marine salvage company from nothing over 12 years of commercial diving experience. He had recovered everything from sunken yachts to lost fishing gear, building a reputation as the guy who could find and retrieve anything that ended up on the ocean floor. His clients knew him as reliable and fearless, the type who would dive in storms, work in zero visibility, and tackle recoveries that insurance companies had written off as impossible. That morning, Reef was preparing for what should have been a routine salvage operation. 3 days earlier, a 42-foot sport fishing vessel had sunk during a sudden squall while returning from a successful charter trip. The boat had gone down in 35 feet of water, with valuable electronics and fishing equipment still aboard. The job was particularly attractive because the boat had been carrying high-end fishing gear worth over $50,000, and Reef's contract included a percentage of the recovered value. The vessel had been targeting bluefin tuna and had been using large quantities of bait fish to attract the massive predators. When the boat sank, all of that bait had gone down with it, creating an underwater buffet that would attract scavengers and predators for weeks. What made this salvage particularly dangerous was the timing and location. July marks the peak of summer feeding season off Cape Cod, when the waters become a highway for migrating fish species and the predators that follow them. At 10:30 a.m., Reef suited up in his commercial diving gear and performed his final equipment checks. The water temperature was a comfortable 68 degrees, and the gentle current would make navigation around the wreck relatively easy. He entered the water with his cutting tools and recovery bags, descending along the anchor line toward the sunken vessel. The visibility was excellent, allowing him to see the entire wreck as he approached. Schools of bait fish had already discovered the boat, attracted by the decomposing bait and fish scraps that continued to leak from the vessel's fish boxes and bait wells. The wreck presented a surreal underwater scene, with fishing rods still in their holders and tackle boxes visible through the cabin windows. Reef began his systematic recovery process, starting with the most valuable items in the boat's cabin. The work was routine. He had performed similar recoveries dozens of times. He used his cutting tools to access locked compartments and carefully bagged electronics and personal items for transport to the surface. What Reef didn't know was that an 8-foot short-fin mako shark had been attracted to the wreck site by the scent trail of decomposing bait. Short-fin mako sharks are the Formula One cars of the shark world, capable of reaching speeds exceeding 45 miles per hour and making spectacular leaps up to 20 feet out of the water. These magnificent predators can grow up to 12 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds, with a torpedo-shaped body perfectly designed for high-speed pursuit of prey. Makos are known for their incredible intelligence and occasional aggressive behavior, particularly around fishing vessels where bait and blood in the water can trigger their feeding response. The predator had been following the tuna migration when the chemical signals from the sunken vessel triggered its investigative response. Makos are known for their curiosity about unusual objects, and the combination of a large artificial structure and abundant food sense made the wreck irresistible to the shark's predatory instincts. 45 minutes into the dive, as Reef worked inside the boat's cabin recovering electronics, the mako shark arrived at the wreck site. The predator approached with the lightning-fast movements characteristic of its species, covering the distance from the edge of visibility to the wreck in seconds. The attack came with devastating suddenness and incredible speed. One moment, Reef was focused on removing equipment from the boat's console. The next moment, 800 pounds of apex predator struck him with the force of a torpedo. The mako's powerful jaws clamped down on his torso, the shark's grip-designed teeth penetrating his wetsuit and body with crushing force. The impact drove Reef against the boat's cabin wall, his equipment scattered across the wreck site. The mako's attack was characterized by the explosive speed and power that makes these sharks so formidable. There was no warning, no opportunity to defend himself, and no chance to escape once the predator had committed to its strike. The attack lasted less than 2 minutes, but the damage was catastrophic. When the mako finally released its grip and disappeared back into the blue water, Reef was left with injuries that were immediately life-threatening. His surface support crew heard the commotion through his communication system and immediately began emergency ascent procedures. Despite their rapid response and immediate first aid efforts, Reef had sustained massive internal injuries from the mako's powerful bite. The shark's teeth had penetrated major blood vessels and organs, causing internal bleeding that was beyond field treatment. He lost consciousness during the emergency ascent and died from massive trauma before being brought to the surface. His final moments were spent not as a master of his underwater domain, but as a victim of nature's most perfectly designed killing machine. The investigation revealed that mako sharks were known to frequent the area during summer months, following the tuna migration. Marine biologists noted that the sunken boat's decomposing bait had created conditions that would naturally attract predators, and Reef's presence during peak feeding hours had resulted in a fatal encounter. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.